Hello everyone, it's Scott, and today as we're finishing up March of the Machine preview season, now we're looking at the top cards for Standard. And we're also going to look at the top double face cards, those transforming double face cards, and also we'll look at the top battles as well that I think you're going to see not only in Standard, but in other formats as well. So before we get started, thanks to Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring our March of the Machine preview series. And then remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this in the future. So let's jump into our top 10 cards, our top 15 cards actually for Standard. So at number 15, we're going to do Surge of Salvation. For 1 white mana, you and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. Prevent all damage that black and or red sources would deal to creatures you control this turn. I think this is a very powerful spell because right now the format is dominated by black, and this is going to give you not only hexproof from black spells, but also then any damage that black creatures would deal to you is negated. You could cast this and then attack to basically prevent your creatures from being damaged by your opponent. And I think that's a powerful ability in and of itself. So I think we're going to see this in decks in Standard, certainly as a sideboard card, and I think it's main deckable as well. At number 14, we have Wrenn and the Realmbreaker. For 1 and 2 green mana, you get a legendary Planeswalker, Wrenn, that has 4 loyalty, and lands you control add 1 mana of any color. So that static ability of all of your lands now create mana of any color is a very powerful ability because you don't have to worry about mana fixing anymore. It'll do it. This card does it for you. And then if you +1 Wrenn up to 1 target land you control becomes a 3/3 elemental creature with vigilance, hexproof, and haste until end of turn. It's still a land. So Wrenn has the ability that we've seen on Nissa cards in the past where you can turn a land into a creature and attack with it, and I think that's a nice ability to add an additional attacker on a given turn kind of unexpectedly. And for -2 you can mill 3 cards, then you may put a permanent card from among the mill cards into your hand. So it's basically it's costing 2 loyalty for Wrenn, but basically you're looking at the top 3 cards of your library and putting a permanent in your hand, which in the decks that I would expect to see Wrenn and the Realmbreaker in, you're going to get a card every single time, whether it's a land and or a permanent that you control. And for -7, you get an emblem with you may play lands and cast permanent spells from your graveyard. So that if you're able to get to the ultimate, it's a very powerful ability. Basically, you can play your graveyard, and because of that, you're going to be able to do a lot of things that other players aren't going to be able to because you get not only the advantage of your library but also your graveyard. All right, at number 13 I have Bloodfeather Phoenix. For 1 and a red mana you get a Phoenix. That's a 2/2. It has flying, and Bloodfeather Phoenix can't block. And whenever an instant or sorcery spell you control deals damage to an opponent or battle, you may pay 1 red mana. If you do, return Bloodfeather Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste until the end of the turn. So the recursiveness of Bloodfeather Phoenix is going to be very powerful. So if your opponent cannot exile it, in a typical red deck, you've got at least 8 to 10, maybe more instants and sorceries that you're going to play over the course of a game. And basically, anytime you play one of those, you can pay an additional red mana and you get Bloodfeather Phoenix back. So I think as a recursive threat, this is a very powerful ability that we'll see a lot of in mono red decks in Standard. At number 12, we've got Fairy Mastermind. For 1 and a blue mana, you get a Fairy Rogue. That's a 2/1 with flash and with flying. And whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, you draw a card. So the nice thing about this is Fairy Mastermind is a card draw engine because you're going to be able to, for 4 mana, have each player draw a card. So on you have that ability to make your opponent draw that second card, which means for 4 mana you draw 2, which is a good ability in and of itself. And there are other ways of getting opponents to draw cards as well. A lot of decks have built into them card draw. So I think that ability in and of itself makes this a very playable Magic card, and I'm going to assume people are going to figure out ways to break that ability. Next, we have at number 11, Phyrexian Censor. For 2 and a white mana, you get a Phyrexian Wizard. That's a 3/3. And each player cannot cast more than one non-Phyrexian spell each turn, and non-Phyrexian creatures enter the battlefield tapped. So I think there's going to be a dedicated Phyrexian deck, and this is going to be a key card in that deck, because limiting the opponent's ability to cast spells to 1 per turn, and then you also would have any of their spells come in tapped if they're not Phyrexian, is a really powerful ability. And on the flip side, from your perspective, you're going to be able to cast pretty much everything in your deck whenever you want to, because again, it's non-Phyrexian spells you can only cast one of. So, you can cast a removal spell and then a Phyrexian spell as well. So I think this is going to be, again, a key card in that deck that is going to make it very difficult for opponents to play the game. Next, at number 10, we have Zephyr Singer. For 2 and 2 blue mana, you get a Siren Pirate. That's a 3/4 with Convoke, and then it has Flying and Vigilance. And when Zephyr Singer enters the battlefield, put a flying counter on each creature that convoked it. So because of the Convoke ability to give other creatures flying, I think this is a fantastic Magic card, because it's going to help other creatures that don't naturally have flying get flying. And once you've got flying on a lot of different cards, what that's going to allow you to do is, rather than battle on the ground with your opponent, you're going to be able to fly over, deal a lot of damage, and hopefully win the game in a couple of turns, unless they can deal with all these additional flyers that you have. And we do have a lot of cards that have Vigilance in the format right now. So because of that, you might even be able to attack first, then play Zephyr Singer's ability, and go ahead and not only attack, but also then get that counter and put yourself in a much better position to win the game. At number 9, we have Monastery Mentor. This is a reprint that goes back to Fate Forged. It costs 2 and a white mana. You get a 2/2 human monk with prowess, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 white monk creature token with prowess. I think this is going to be a valuable card in Standard. We already have Monastery Swiftspear, so Swiftspear and Monastery Mentor, they go together. And we also got Kenra's Spell Spear. So I think between those 3 cards, they all have prowess and abilities, and I think they're going to, probably see a Boros or Jeskai even prowess deck that's going to be pretty powerful, because you're going to have probably 12 cards that are creatures, just with those 3 creature, you can play 4 of each of them, and then you're going to be able to play spell after spell after spell, increase the power and toughness of your creatures, and then in addition to that, you're going to be creating those 1/1 white monk creature tokens with prowess every turn, and it's just going to snowball. So unless we're in a Standard where there's a lot of board wipes, these cards are going to move fast and create a lot of creatures that your opponent has to deal with, and if they can't deal with them, then you're going to win the game pretty quickly. Next, at number 8, we have Rampaging Raptor. For 2 and 2 red mana, you get a dinosaur with trample and haste. It's a 4/4, and you can pay 2 and a red mana, and Rampaging Raptor gets +2/+0 until the end of turn, so you can increase its power. And whenever Rampaging Raptor deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to target planeswalker that player controls or battle that player protects. So I think this is a very good Magic card, and that tacked on ability of whatever damage you deal to an opponent, you can deal to their planeswalker, or you can deal to their battle that you've cast that they have to protect, I think is a tremendous ability. And I think this is a 4 of in decks that are going to go ahead and have a number of battles in them, because just being able to ramp into this, on turn 4 it has haste. You cast something on turn 2 or 3 that's a battle. You don't have to attack that now. You attack your opponent, and any excess damage you're dealing to those, you're going to deal to those as well. So I think this is a very powerful card, and I expect to see a lot of it in Standard. At number 7, we've got Pile On for 3 and a black mana. You get an instant that destroys target creature or planeswalker and surveils 2. And again, you can convoke this. So you can play this card and go ahead and convoke it into play. Don't pay any mana cost and continue your game plan. So I think that in and of itself, the power and ability to kill a planeswalker as well, and that surveil ability, we can't underestimate that, because that's going to get you to a place where you can, shape the top of your library to things that you hopefully want to play. All right, at number 6, we've got Inga and Azika for 2, a blue and a green mana. You get a legendary creature that's a god human and is a 4/4. And creatures you control have vigilance and add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell. So one of the things that I'm seeing is we've already had a critical mass of good green spells, but in addition to that, we have more and more good blue creature spells that we're seeing, 2 that I've already talked about on this list. So I think there's a chance that we're going to see a blue-green deck develop around those creatures, and Inga and Azika are perfect for that deck, because when you cast a creature spell, if it's 3 or more mana from creatures was spent to cast it, then you get to draw a card. So basically you're going to be, because of the vigilance that they have, you can attack with them, and then afterwards you can go ahead and convoke basically in a creature, because you're going to be tapping your creatures to add mana to cast spells, and you're going to get additional card draw every single turn because of that. And I think that is going to be a powerful ability in Standard that will again, it's going to depend on whether green and blue are powerful enough to get a deck developed, but I think people are going to try to build around this card. At number 5, we've got Rankle and Torbrand for 1, 2 black and 2 red mana. You get a legendary creature that's a fairy dwarf. It's a 3/4. It has flying, first strike, and haste. And whenever Rankle and Torbrand deals combat damage to a player or battle, choose any number of these things. So you can have everybody create a treasure token. You can have each player sacrifice a creature. And if a source would deal damage to a player or battle this turn, it deals that much damage +2 instead. So I can see this coming down on turn 5. It flies over. You've already got a board presence. You're going to attack with everything. You might have a battle that you're trying to defeat, or you're just attacking your opponent. And the consequence of that is, if your opponent doesn't have things that can block, then you're getting to a place where you're doing 2 additional damage on top of whatever they were going to do anyways. And that's a powerful ability. And the fact that Rankle and Torbrand have haste, that's really important, because you play it, you attack with it, and then you get the abilities as well. And that makes, in my mind, Rankle and Torbrand the perfect card, whether you're putting it into a Rakdos shell or even the Grixis shell. If you're adding more creatures to it, then I think this is a very good card for Standard. Next, at number 4, we have Ancient Imperiosaur for 5 and 2 green mana. You get a dinosaur. That's a 6/6 that has Trample and Ward 2, but it also has Convoke. And in this case, I think this is a fantastic ability, because when you convoke, when you tap a creature to help cast Ancient Imperiosaur, that Ancient Imperiosaur enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it for each creature that convoked it. So in green right now, we have a critical mass of small creatures that I think, when we look at this card and its trample ability, are going to allow you to, as early as turn 4, potentially get this into play. If you've got a couple of 1/1s, you put a couple of a couple of 2/2s, you might have 4 or 5, and then you're at a place where you can convoke this into play. And then at that point, if you've used 4 to get this down to 3 mana, or 3 to get it down to 4 mana, then it's a 12/12 or a 14/14 with Ward 2. So if your opponent cannot deal with it immediately, it's going to probably win on the next turn because of the convoke ability. So I think this is potentially a monsters creature in standard going forward, and even in other formats I think there's some playability for it. Next at number 3 we have Glissa, Herald of Predation. For 3, a black and a green mana, you get a legendary creature. That's a Phyrexian zombie elf. That's a 3/5. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, choose 1. Incubate 2 twice. Transform all incubator tokens you control, or Phyrexians you control gain first strike and death touch until end of turn. Now, I've talked about already a little bit about, I think there's going to be a dedicated Phyrexian deck. This goes in that because it has the ability to simply transform all of your incubator tokens. So there's a lot of different things that are going to cause you to create incubator tokens. Glissa does it herself. And we'll talk about Elish Norn when we look at transforming double face cards. That card also can do this as well. So I think as we look at that Phyrexian deck, we know it's going to be in black. We know it's going to be in white. And if we sprinkle in some green, we can get Glissa. And then Glissa's ability either is going to create incubator tokens for us or is going to go ahead and transform those incubator tokens. And when we've got a large board, everything gains first strike, everything gains death touch. And that basically means that your opponent is going to lose any creatures that are blocking on that particular turn. And if you've got a big enough board state, it's a one shot to wipe out their board, and then you're left with all your creatures, and then you get to do it all again on the next turn. And number 2, we have Chrome Host Seed Shark. For 2 and a blue mana, you get a Phyrexian Shark. That's a 2/4 with flying. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, incubate X, where X is that spell's mana value. So this, I think, is a very interesting card. We already have a mono blue tempo deck that I think this can easily slot into, or you bring in some white with it, or other colors with it to make sure that you can go ahead and transform those incubator tokens at a low cost. And the result of that is, I think this is a very good card going forward in standard because you're going to just get token after token after token when you're casting non-creature spells. And that ability on its own is going to help create a pretty big board state. And I think this fits probably well into a control shell where you're casting this on turn 3 and then you're casting control spells throughout the rest of the game. You create a large number of incubator tokens, and then at some point, whether it's in Azorius control or something else, you're able to get all those incubator tokens to transform, and then on the next turn, you can simply go ahead and swing and win the game. All right, our number 1 card is Omnath, Locus of All. For a white, blue, black, red, and green mana, you get a legendary creature. That's a Phyrexian Elemental. That's a 4/4. And if you would lose unspent mana, that mana becomes black instead. So my reading of that is you can tap things for mana, and if you don't spend it, it becomes black mana that you get to keep, which in and of itself is a powerful ability. And then at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card if it has 3 or more colored mana symbols in its mana cost. And if you do, add 3 mana in any combination of its colors and put it into your hand. So what Omnath is doing is you're going to play this in a deck that is a dedicated 3-color deck, or even a 5-color deck. We've got plenty of cards right now that are 3 and 4 color that are seeing play in standard, and Omnath goes right there with those cards as a way of you see it, you get extra mana, you get the card, and then if you don't put it in, if you don't reveal it, then put it in your hand. So if you actually don't get a card that's 3 colors, then you're still getting to draw that card anyways. So when you hit a land, it just goes into your hand. So I think Omnath is not quite as powerful as the Omnath we saw in Zendikar Rising, but it's pretty powerful. And with the power level that we've seen of Atraxa, and other 4 and 5 color spells, because of the way the mana is right now, they're all playable. They're all good. And Omnath, you draw 2 cards, you get to create some mana if you have 3 colors on it. So that in and of itself makes this a very, very powerful Magic card, and I think it's going to see play all over Standard in those 4 and 5 color decks. All right, so that's our list of the top cards for Standard. Again, we'll be back looking at the top cards for that we're transforming double face cards, and then looking at our top battles as well. So hang on, we'll be back with more March of the Machine top cards in a couple of other videos. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.